I'd love to kick it off. I'm really excited to have Pam and Matt with us. One of the things that we've seen over the past 5 to 10 years, if you look across most Fortune 500 companies, is not only a desire to kind of reduce certain cost centers, right? And in my previous life at BCG, we used to always look at every single function and try to figure out how that cost was growing as either a function of revenue or some other metric. But how to manage those costs, how to reduce them, but also how to make sure that they're more predictable year over year, right? In order to ensure the financial health of your organization. Legal, for a variety of reasons, has sometimes broken that model, right? Been less predictable, and for those in the audience who have, are more deep in legal, everyone understands why. But Pam, just to kind of kick us off, I'd love for you to just set the stage. Why is it, and for those who maybe don't have as much of a background in legal, why is legal sometimes less predictable?
Sure, and this is really the stuff that my colleagues oversee more from a legal operations perspective. But just as a primer, litigation is the stuff of peaks and valleys. And I think that's especially true for larger corporations and or serial defendants. I think many large corporations find themselves in that bucket of serial defendant, not necessarily directing with their own suits as a plaintiff, but getting sued, right? And so that litigation profile, I think it varies from company to company as to how consistent it is. But the greater consistency you have, the more predictability, I think. And then beyond litigation, just being the stuff of peaks and valleys, I think the continuum you find yourself in, it's sort of like once you start on that path, how far do you get, right? I think, the costs associated with a lawsuit from the outset, you're really calculating sort of like going all the way to the end, right? One of the most expensive things being trial. But even if you settle, a lot of times you get stuck in sort of the discovery hamster wheel. And I think ultimately, how much data you have, what's at risk in the lawsuit, what are you fighting over? And how much data there might be about that subject, or even people within your corporation or your entity that are familiar with the events and or the claims. So I think discovery itself is a huge part of exactly what drives the cost, and also the unpredictability around how much a lawsuit is going to cost. And I think, going back to that idea of large corporations and serial defendants, I think a lot of, Qualcomm is one of those, that we find ourselves in some pretty lopsided litigation where we may be, we're talking discovery with an entity or a party that may not have the level and extent of data on the issue that we do, right? And so when it comes to negotiating discovery, lo and behold, there's somebody else involved who gets a vote. And, by virtue of negotiation, how many and who are the custodians? What sources of data do you need to tap to respond completely, fully, and ethically to the discovery requests served on you, and post-negotiation what you've agreed to actually produce. So I think, in my mind, it's kind of the broader aspect of litigation in general. And then beyond that, the component parts that can really drive a lot of cost. All that said, as much as you can forecast every piece of that, you might just settle and find yourself with a surplus. I think that's always really helpful, but I think ultimately driving a lot of the unpredictability.
What are some examples of unpredictable costs that you typically, help your clients address, or, unpredictable costs that you've seen kind of be top of mind?
Sure. Listen, my answer is going to be pretty similar to Pam's, with a little less polish, but I'm a trained project manager, so that's my background. And when I say project manager, not discovery project manager, but like PMI, Project Management Institute, the 9 knowledge areas of the PMBOK, which is the project manager body of knowledge: scope, time, cost, quality, procurement, integration, communication, and a handful of others that are very important. But when I look at that and I compare it to all the work that we do in discovery, it's hard to manage any of those, right? Scope, always changing, right? Because as you uncover information, it might change this. It might change the nature of that case. Integration, you are managing multiple parties, right? There's Pam's team, and she's probably managing 3 of them internally. There's a service provider, there's a law firm, sometimes there are multiple law firms, there's a managed review provider in place, and there's an opposing party who, by the way, is just trying to throw a wrench into the works at all times. And so not only are there many parties to manage, but one of them is not your friend. So continue down that list, quality, right? We could spend the entire time talking about that in terms of the discovery workflow and how it affects the ultimate predictability of the cost. So you asked for examples, and there's one I often think of because quality matters, and Pam and I spend a lot of time talking about it. But back in the old dark ages, this never happens anymore, you could kick off a review. And after all of the training and some of the initial level setting on what is responsive and what is not, you might spend a month reviewing documents and then go do a QC and find out that 10% of the documents dumped into that non-responsive pile are responsive. Well, now what do you do, right? That quality just created a huge headache in terms of the time that you're going to have to continue to expand to do that work, the cost, and then who's going to do it, right? Because you just killed all the trust in the system. And so do you say, well, the same people that caused that problem are going to be the ones to do it, but they're going to have better training? Well, how do I know that training's going to change? And so it's just every one of those pieces when I look down, I mean, you're not going to analyze all of them, but there's a component of discovery that makes it difficult to manage. Not to mention projects by their nature are hard in the first place. No one ever has heard of a housing project, right? A reno that went under budget and under time. Just doesn't happen, right? And discovery, every one of those variables is even harder. And so I think that's why you end up, especially on a project basis, with just complete unpredictability. Quick backstory, but I worked at Qualcomm for almost 7 years prior to Pam's joining. We actually just didn't quite overlap, but it was close. But we've been working together for a long time as well. But I had that job. That was part of my responsibility at Qualcomm, was to help predict the budget in terms of discovery. And so I love spreadsheets. So I was in there managing it out. Hey, how many custodians? What's our average gigabyte per custodian? How long do we think this matter's going to last and host? Built in the variation. Yeah, you know what? We're going to manage this plus or minus 40%, whatever it was. And every 3 months, that thing would blow up, and you'd have to go have the conversation with finance. Why is this budget not matching out? Well, you know why it's not matching. Why are we even doing this exercise? Based on that transactional mode of interacting. And at the time we had multiple providers, and we weren't really rolling things up as a portfolio. It was about how do you manage the budget for each of those transactional accounts. And yes, new things were going to be added to it, but that's where, and we're going to talk about this I think a little bit, but the aggregation and looking at things at a portfolio level is one way of managing the unpredictability that is built into project level discovery work.
How does this partnership model help address, stuff like document review costs and other reactive events, right? Like data breach. I mean, there's stuff that's like highly reactive. The question here is, while it may be predictable that the unit costs are, once you know what happens and once you know the volumes are sometimes inherently unpredictable, right? So yeah, I think the person asking the question would love to hear how you can make that cost predictable, and then what role does technology or AI play in that objective?
Oof, all right. Well, one, I mean, yeah, listen, there's still always fluctuation. I think, what we were talking about is at least there's no fluctuation in the particular bucket of discovery of my technology provider for discovery. But those buckets overflow and overlap, right? Because you've got managed review and you've got outside counsel and the rest. And so, yeah, I mean, Pam, your budget is still unpredictable.
Yeah.
And we don't get to solve that in any short time frame. And so that's where, again, we go back and, let's bring that legal ops conversation back around, right? Where does the data say the largest problems are? And so if Pam's analyzing the budget or working with, her internal team to analyze that, you can say, well, what are the biggest, what's more important, right? There's the size of the budget and there's the unpredictability. And so we can attack both of those directions. But again, a 10-year relationship and all of the data that we're bringing to that gives a lot of insight. And so I think we know what the biggest cost drivers are on an ongoing basis. And we know that there's technology out there to attack some of those things. And so then we start doing our best business work to say, what are the technologies that are going to attack the largest problem? And how long is it going to take us to get there, and what's the cost to get us there? Because as Pam was pointing out, there are a lot of other things other than just the technology and the workflow. You have to build trust into the system. So I'll address that. How do you bring in a risk-averse counsel? Well, there's safety in numbers, right? And as soon as and Pam knows, the profiles of each of these, and say, well, hey, I want to work with this internal counsel and that external counsel because I know that they're on board. I'm going to bring them in. I'm going to win. I'm going to create some safety. And then I'm going to use the trust that I've created through that win to go and bring in the next round, right? In the next round until we get the laggards or the risk averse. Because Pam at that point can say, got a track record and I got you, right? I got you. Come on board.
Yeah. And once you're that established, to be perfectly honest, we have so much support internally. And I know that that's a bit of a luxury model when it comes to discovery and litigation. I don't mean to look past that. Ultimately, we are a company that has come to understand that litigation is a part of our business model. And so there's there's a lot of room for me to do what I need to do the best way and ethically, right? And so I know that a lot of folks in my position are not operating with the same level of support, tone from the top. And so I think in the initial instance, it's about getting there, at least making sure that the tone from the top supports you and moving forward in that regard. But we are, I'm operating from the luxurious position that I get to put my folks in front of outside counsel and let them know, this is how you work with us. These are the rules. And don't try to break them. We will be back. We will work with you every single day. Honestly, this is how we work efficiently and effectively. So do it with us. You will be the beneficiary, right? And so once you have that strength of position, obviously it's sort of self-fulfilling, but getting there, I think, is probably what is very interesting to a lot of folks. And I never really understood that. I'd always be asked to present, but how did you get to demand that? And it is the benefit of an investment from our company in litigation and discovery in particular. And it's one of those situations, elephant in the room, is that Qualcomm was sanctioned for discovery about a decade ago, and our company didn't waste that crisis. I'm not 100% sure. I think it's probably a longer road to get this level of adoption when you don't have that crisis, right?